I would like to ask now if folks can mute their lines. We will have a Q&A component here as part of the webinar, but until then, please do mute your lines so that everyone can hear the presentation. So I'd like to now transition to Dr. Christie Canaria. I will give a brief background about Christie. Christie is a friend of the SPRINT program. She actually was part of our team as we were thinking about how to develop this program, this unique training program for behavioral scientists, and has been a great advisor and friend and colleague on this. And we're actually now planning to move into our third cohort of SPRINT. So at the end of the line, I'll also share some information, so hopefully we can engage all of you as we try to start formulating that next cohort. So Dr. Christie Canaria is a program manager in the Small Business Innovation Research Development Center at the National Cancer Institute. She provides programmatic support to small businesses applying to SBIR and STTR programs and has areas of expertise in biological imaging, biosensors, and nanotechnology. Dr. Canaria is a central figure in planning special center initiatives, conducting outreach activities, and coordinating communications. In 2014, she played a leading role in launching the Innovation Core, or I-Core, at NIH as a pilot. This program designed to support training to help project teams at NIH-funded small businesses overcome key obstacles along the path of innovation and commercialization. So she has a lot to share with us related to that. Dr. Canaria was awarded the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship and began science policy work in DC. Dr. Canaria has worked in industry, expanding and optimizing surface chemistry and imaging processes for genome sequencing technologies. She earned her PhD in chemistry from the California Institute of Technology and also holds a BS in chemistry from the University of California, San Diego. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Canaria.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, April, so much for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you for the invitation to speak to the SPRINT cohorts. I've had the opportunity to speak to some of the classes previously, and I know that after going through the SPRINT program, you've had a nice exposure to the lean methodologies, lean startup methodologies. And so what I want to do here is give you an opportunity to think about what may come next for you and your technologies. As April mentioned, I am a program director at the NCI's SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Development Center. What I'll be doing in this talk today is giving you an overview of the SBIR STTR programs, some of the benefits that come for awardees, hopefully maybe to incentivize you to think about applying for these programs. And then I'll give you some point you in direction for some of the funding opportunities which are evergreen throughout the year, as well as some tips on applying. So as I mentioned, a brief overview of SBIR STTR. If you aren't familiar with these programs, they are what we call a set-aside program. We have, across the federal government, a $2.5 billion set-aside to support commercialization, and that goes in the form of grants and contracts to small businesses. At NCI specifically, our budget last year was $159 million annually and almost $1 billion across the NIH. So, you know, these are real dollars that the federal government is putting towards stimulating technology development, R&D, to support the American public for life science technologies. As many of you already know, because you are you have been awarded you know, grants from the NIH, the NCI is just one of 27 different institutes and centers, ICs, at the NIH. And what's sort of special about the NCI program is that we at the Development Center here deal exclusively with SBIRs. So the program staff here is intimately involved with managing our portfolio. And I wanted to share this slide just so you get a sense for what types of technologies we fund. Certainly educational tools and software are among those. It is a small portion of our portfolio today, but I would say that it is also the fastest growing segment of our portfolio. So for those of you who are working on behavioral interventions, educational tools, software technologies, this is certainly an area that NCI SBIR is interested in funding and has a nice history of actually making grants too. In this slide, I wanted to share a few things. One is up here in the upper right, we have an inbox, nciSBIR@mail.nih.gov. I encourage any of you, after today's presentation, if you want to reach out to one of our program staff to get some more instructive feedback on your technology and its appropriateness for SBIR or STTR, we recommend that you reach out to us through this mailbox. There are a number of us. You can see our faces here along with some of our backgrounds. April gave you a nice overview of my background tech research-wise. I did want to point out two people who you might find of interest, and that is Drs. Greg Evans, who is one of our lead program directors, along with Dr. Patty Weber. These two individuals actually have specialties in working with companies with technologies like educational tools, behavioral interventions. So if you are interested in reaching out to them, please do so by emailing us your ideas through our inbox. So maybe you're an academic, maybe you're already a small business, and you're interested in learning more about the SBIR programs and what that means and how you might be eligible. So eligibility for SBIR and STTR. First, you should recognize that the applicant must be what we call a small business concern. You must be organized as a for-profit entity. For us, small means less than 500 employees, which I think many of you may still qualify for. And because this is a federal program, we do require that a majority of the operation be held by U.S.-based individuals. And as I mentioned before,
Christie,
yes.
This is Sarah. I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. We keep dropping audio.
Oh, I do. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what's causing it. So if you could just hang on 1 second.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
Right, why don't you keep going, and I'll be working on this in the background.
Okay, great. Well, like I mentioned, eligible entities must be small businesses outlined here. That means if you are not yet a small business, there are a number of registrations you'll need to complete. And if you do that de novo, let's say it takes about 6 or 8 weeks to complete that process. So keep that in mind if you're interested in becoming an SBIR or STTR eligible applicant. Now, as I mentioned before, we deal with SBIR and STTR programs. These are sister programs, very similar, but with a few critical differences. Under SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, this allows or permits research institutions like universities to partner with the small business in the technology effort. Under SBIR, the small business can outsource up to 1/3 of its activities in phase 1 and up to phase 2 and up to 50% of its phase 2 activities. And eligibility for the PI on the application, that PI must be majority employed at the small business. Now, many of you may be at universities, and perhaps you're thinking of spinning out a small business, or perhaps you're thinking of collaborating with an existing small business. STTR may be that program for you to consider, because STTR requires partnership with a research institution like a university. Under STTR, at least 40% of the work must be done by the small business, but anywhere from 30 to 60% of the effort, i.e. budget, can be done by and go to the research institution. And the PI on those STTR applications may be majority employed at either the university, say, or at the small business. So there is more flexibility in where the PI originates under STTR, and there is more flexibility in how the budget is structured. So for most folks who are trying to decide between the two programs, that is, those are the two criteria that they look at to help them make that decision. I mentioned phase 1, phase 2. It's the SBIR and STTR programs are phased programs, and these are not to be confused with clinical trial phases, but these are SBIR STTR phases. And so we sort of tranche the awards out in the following way. Phase 1 is typically at NCI, a proof of concept type proposal. We fund up to $300,000 over a 6 to 12-month period. Under phase 2, you would come back after phase 1, and you might propose longer, deeper R&D type activities. Your application will require at that point what we call a commercialization plan, a discussion of what you think will be the revenue model for your product that you're selling, and we will award at the NCI $2 million over 2 years. We do have a follow-on program called Phase 2B Bridge that is a sort of extension of Phase 2, and it's eligible for companies basically that have completed the Phase 2. And then Phase 3 is not a true phase. We don't have any federal dollars for Phase 3 activities, but that is expected to be when the technology that the federal government has funded finally does make it out as a commercial product. At the top there, I've combined Phase 1 and Phase 2 into what we call fast track. So if you're new to the program, you can apply as either a Phase 1 applicant or a fast track where you apply simultaneously for both Phase 1 and Phase 2. And there are different reasons you might want to fast track your application. For example, maybe you already have a lot of Phase 1 type data and you want to sort of roll the two applications into one. That would be one example. So now moving on to some of these resources that we have for our awardees. NCI SBIR is more than just seed money. Of course, we do provide funding, but we also do provide guidance, mentorship, and outreach activities for our awardees. Programs like the I-Corps program, which was mentioned previously, and I am one of the folks who helped build this program at the NIH, and it has now grown to include more than a dozen institutes at the NIH and centers at the CDC. So we're very proud of the program as we've been able to grow it over the last few years. It's an entrepreneurial immersion program, very similar to, in style to what you've probably seen through the SPRINT program. Our curriculum emphasizes reaching out to customers. It is different in the depth that we go into. So for example, specifically, we run the program for 8 weeks, and we expect that the teams who go through will actually conduct over 100 interviews during that time. So it's a lot more in depth. We cover much of the business model canvas, which I think many of you are already familiar with. Other aspects that are distinct to the NIH program at I-Corps program at NIH are that we have these dedicated tracks. So all of our teams that go through I-Corps at NIH are from the life sciences sector. And what we've done is we've put together a team of instructors who are paired off. One is an I-Corps node instructor, and the other is what we call a domain expert. And so we have 3 tracks with a therapeutics bent, a diagnostics e-health, and a medical device bent. And teams, we have had teams in the past go through I-Corps at NIH, and where their technologies, their products were behavioral interventions. And those teams end up going up through our diagnostic tools track with our experts who have some background with both diagnostics and e-health type technologies. So I know many of you are already familiar with the program style, having gone through sprints, but I did want to share examples of some of the types of teams, other types of teams that go through the program and what they learn. This is one company called KindnessSense, an NCI funded SBIR company, and they had come in developing a preclinical assay to characterize new oncology therapies. And when they came into I-Corps, they had this sort of platform technology, and they didn't know what direction it was going to take. But after going through the 8-week program under the guidance of the instructors, this team was able to recognize that there were opportunities for them to focus on, and for the duration of the course, they decided on a particular path to investigate. And because they went through the program, they're able to identify a real revenue stream for the company in terms of providing fee-for-service contracts for other big pharma companies. So this is just a great example of how a company could pivot sort of in a short time and get to a place where they were able to start generating revenue for the company, which in turn allows them to continue pursuing additional types of products coming down their own pipeline. So that's just an example of one company that I went through. Another company that I wanted to share was this company, Gigagen. They came through the program not once, but twice. So if you can imagine taking the sprint program, doubling it, and then doing that twice. Gigagen is a company that did that. But what they did was they really leveraged the information that they got through their customer discovery, paired with the feedback from the instructors, and really took advantage of the network that they grew through the I-Corps program. And you know, this team went through the program starting in 2014, and recently were able to raise a $50 million investment from another partner in Spain. So, you know, this is, you know, one example of a great success from one of our awardees who went through the program. And we're very proud to see that these companies are taking what they learn in the I-Corps program and continuing to move forward with those lessons. Other things that we provide at NCI SBIR include mentorship and networking. I'll just share a couple of the other types of programs we provide. And if you become an SBIR awardee, these would also be available to you. One is called our Investor Initiatives Program, where we invite companies from our portfolio to apply, and they sort of submit white papers, if you will. And we allow large pharma companies and other strategic partners to review those, and based on those reviews, NCI SBIR comes up with a list and of companies who we think are at the right stage to be presented to investors, and we will help support them, those companies, in attending different showcase events, investor presentation venues, and help them sort of just receive, give them coaching on how to present to investors, because it's very different from the type of presentation you might give at a lecture series or to a lab group. And so, you know, this is just one of the programs we provide. We do about 30 companies around the go around the country to participate in these different initiative programs. I can say that in 2016, you know, we had 36 companies go through this at 7 different events. They were able to, you know, exponentially grow their networks through this type of interaction, meeting with investors and strategic partnerships, and a lot of them, you know, found a lot of value from the program. One of them who went through this program, from CellSite Technologies, the CEO, Aruna Gambhir, was able to leverage her interactions to help secure a partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim. So, you know, and the other aspect that she provides is that having received funding from the federal government through the SBIR program really helps to de-risk the technology for other investment partners like these other pharma and strategic partners. And so, you know, SBIR can work hand in hand with other third-party funding to help companies get the resources they need to carry their technologies forward. Another program that we offer is called the FRAC Workshop, the Federal Resources to Accelerate Commercialization. And this is where we help our awardees connect with resources, not just at the NIH, but across the federal government. So we have speakers from the FDA, from CMS, USPTO, you know, for those who are developing behavioral, you know, educational technologies or interventions. You may or may not need to consider all of these resources, but we want you to know that they're here for you, and we can help connect you with the right folks to help answer the questions, you know, who are the other key partners in your technology's ecosystem? What are those key activities you need to be thinking about coming up the road as you continue developing your technology? And then as sort of a last sort of plug for about what we do is we also try to maintain a social media presence, not just for us, but really for our awardees as well. You know, what we do with our, with these tax dollars is we are trying to spur innovation and move technologies closer to the public space where they can have a real benefit for patients. And so we want to be able to do that. And so we encourage our awardees to share their stories. Here is one company that we funded, many of you may recognize, Illumina. They are one of the leaders, they are the leader, I think, in next generation sequencing. But one day, I mean, they did also start off as a small company at one point, and so they received SBIR funds back in the early 2000s, late 90s, and were able to leverage those resources to help them build a technology which allows them today to be a leader in next generation sequencing. Another awardee is Chronotherapeutics. This one's kind of cool because it sort of blends social interaction back with drug delivery. Their product, Smart Stop, is a nicotine replacement therapy. It's a patch you put on, and they've been able to time this device so that it delivers nicotine at certain times of the day when researchers know cravings are highest. For instance, when you wake up in the morning and close to meal times. So, you know, they're using science to get smarter about how they deliver therapeutics to patients, and then it's also tied to a smartphone app. I see some chats, and I just hope you can all still hear me and are following along. But I did want to say that, of course, what we do at NCI SBIR is provide funding. As I mentioned before, $160 million from the NCI in 2016 went towards supporting commercialization of technologies through our grants and contracts to small businesses. So those, as I mentioned, are the two sort of key mechanisms that we use. Under grants, this is the more traditional way that we provide funding. About 75% of our budgets go to grants. And there are two types of opportunities under grants. There's the omnibus solicitation, happens throughout the year. This is where you, the investigator, can initiate any project proposal within the mission of NCI, and we will review it and make awards there. There are 3 receipt dates throughout the year, and they are standard: January 5th, April 5th, September 5th, so the next one would be January 5th. We also have some targeted solicitations. As of this moment, none I think are necessarily aligned with technologies that the sprint teams are working on. But you know, throughout the year and periodically we will get different targeted solicitations coming out. And that's in contrast to contracts, where there is a strong priority assignment by the NCI to solicit applicants to develop some of these technologies for commercial use. And that one only has 1 receipt date. throughout the year. And if to sort of contrast the two again, grants versus contracts, one of the things I want to point out are that, some of the things I want to point out are that for grants, all applications come into NIH and are reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review, whereas under contracts, we have Division of Extramural Affairs that reviews contract applications that come in. Under grants, we welcome you to speak with us anytime throughout the year to get feedback on what your proposal is. Under contracts, federal contracting rules are very strict, and you can't talk to me, but you have to talk to a specific contractor person who is designated to talk to all potential applicants. Again, for grants, there are 3 receipt dates per year. Under contracts, only 1. But one of the reasons I do bring up contracts is because that one due date is coming up. As I mentioned before, for grants, the next due date is January 5th. So if any of you has a technology that you would like to submit for funding opportunity as a grant, of course, many of you know already grants are non-dilutive. They are not loans. You don't have to pay them back. That's one of the nice things about them. The next application deadline is January 5th. You can see at this URL down here, and the PDF that you'll get has all of these hyperlinks as well. And you can read more about those funding opportunities for the omnibus grants. And then the contract funding opportunities, the next receipt date is coming up later this month on October 20th. And here are some of the links to read more about the program solicitations. So I did want to point out the contract opportunities because it is, I think, timely right now. And then I did want to share this slide because it shows you the 12 topics that NCI has put out for the contracting solicitation. You know, some of them are therapeutics, et cetera, but, you know, some of them like 379, software enabling data integration. Perhaps some of you may be eligible to respond to some of these, and just as an example, I wanted to share with you the types of things we look for. Under contracts, we're very specific about what we expect the activities and deliverables to include. We're also very prescriptive on what the award sizes will be and what the award durations will be. And so you can read about them here. And in the appendix to this presentation, I've included a similar slide to this one for all 12 of the contract topic opportunities. Whenever you apply to the NCI, you should always be aware of things like details like what the budget size is or what the time frame for awards is expected to be. And so I just did want to look a little bit closer and help to demystify some of the things you may have read about SBIR if you've already started looking at it. You'll see a lot of numbers floating around regarding what the budgets are, et cetera. And so what I wanted to do was sort of lay out really where those numbers come from. As I mentioned before, we give out phase 1 awards for proof of concept, and then we give out larger, deeper phase 2 awards for more R&D. And then, of course, there's the fast track option where you combine the two together. The SBA, the Small Business Administration, the policy lays out that phase 1 awards across the federal agencies should be $150K, and that phase 2 should be $1 million. But the SBA has given the NIH a waiver, which says that really our NIH budget caps are $225 for phase 1, $225K, and $1.5 million for phase 2. But on top of that, each institute has an opportunity to waive that cap to be even higher. And so at the NCI, for certain types of projects, we will fund up to $300K for a phase 1 and up to $2 million for a phase 2. So I bring that up so that you can sort of get a sense for what we fund and what is acceptable if you are interested in applying for these programs. This is a list of the NCI waiver topics as they are listed in what we call Appendix A. Your technology does not need to fall under one of these topics, though, in order to request the $300K budget or the $2 million budget. You can see the full list of NIH-approved waiver topics in Appendix A. This is hyperlinked, and if you find that your technology fits under any one of those waiver topics, you can still request the $300K or $2 million budget caps for your proposal. As I mentioned before, here are our portfolio areas. Throughout the year, we have somewhere ranging 400 active projects going on that we manage. You can see here in the chart on the right how that breaks out. As I had mentioned before, about a quarter of our funds go towards funding contracts, whereas the rest go towards funding funding grants. And then if you're really into numbers, you're probably also wondering what the success rate looks like at the NIH. And so you can see, we actually post these online at this link down below if you're interested in what the success rates look like over time. Here on this slide, for 2016, we saw Phase 1, SBIR and STTR success rates somewhere between 12 and 14%, Phase 2 somewhere between 25 and 31. That is across the NIH, of course. If you look at the NCI specifically, it starts to get a little bit more competitive. We do have a larger budget, but we also have a very large pool of applicants, and so our Phase 1 success rates for SBIR, STTR are anywhere from 10 to 16% for Phase 1, and then 15 to 18% for Phase 2. So, given all that, how do you, as a prospective applicant, put together a competitive application? We do have some thoughts on how you can be better prepared for that. And step one is getting to know your IC, and attending a webinar like today's helps fulfill that. You can get to know areas of interest as they vary by institute to institute. As I mentioned before, you are more than welcome to reach out to us through our inbox to speak with a program director to find out if your technology is responsive to either the omnibus or any targeted solicitation that you may not know about. I tried to give, earlier some indication of what the budget limitations are for the types of applications, Phase 1 or Phase 2 you might apply for. And then it's important that you understand that this is IC specific, the way SBIRs are managed. As I mentioned at NCI, we actually have a development center dedicated to a portfolio exclusively of small business awardees. Other institutes across the NIH do it differently. A program director there may have a spread of R1s, R21s, R33s with a smattering, like maybe 2 or 3% of their portfolio is SBIR. So, if you apply to other places within the NIH, recognize that each institute operates differently. And understanding that will, I think, help you navigate the application process. Some of the specifics you should know. People often wonder, when is SBIR, STTR appropriate? We do consider this program to be for early stage companies. Early, but not too early, we say. If you are in the process of trying to get feasibility data so that you can get more third-party investment dollars, SBIR is a great program for that. If you're looking for funding to help with the R&D aspects, of course, SBIR, STTR is a great program for that. And then, if you can hear it from me, but you can also see what some of our previous awardees have said. The one at the top, Lori Hazelhurst from Modulation Therapeutics, for her, she started off at the university, and for her, the drug development technology she was working on was hard to move forward with just traditional R01 dollars. And it was really because of SBIR funding that they were able to take that technology to the next stage. I had brought up Aruna Gambier from CellSite previously. You know, and from her experience, it's investors want to see that the technology has been de-risked to some extent. And so for her company, SBIR funding, because it goes through the rigorous, I'm sure you're aware of, the rigorous peer review through CSR at NIH, you know, that really helps to signal to other investors that the technology you're working on has some merit and is, you know, worthwhile. When not to apply. If you are trying to just chase funding solicitations, this is really not the program for you. I didn't go through this aspect, but if you need cash urgently, SBIR program is also not the way for you to go forward. If you apply for SBIR and you have a great score, you may get funding in as little as 6 months from application. But if your score is in the medium to not great range, it may take us up to a year to decide if we're able to fund your application. So it can be a lengthy process from application to award, which you recognize is a barrier for many small businesses who are running really leanly. If you have a sort of Me Too product, you've already learned through sprints that you'll need to identify what your value propositions are. How does your technology really provide a benefit? How is it differentiated from other products that might be out there already? Also, if you still need a lot of basic research in order to demonstrate a commercial or clinical feasibility, SBIR is probably not the right program. You can still try to get that work done using more traditional, like say R01 type awards to get that sort of data. This slide sort of just summarizes the funding opportunities available and the receipt dates for them. I mentioned the omnibus solicitation. Here are the FOA funding opportunity announcement numbers for them. There are, I listed here, 3 of our active targeted solicitations. All 5 of these FOAs have receipt dates, the standard receipt dates, September 5th, January 5th, April 5th. And then down below, the contract solicitation has a receipt date later this month in October. To highlight again, some of the budget-specific trivia you might want to keep in mind is that SBIR budgets are defined by total costs, and the subcontracting is limited. As I mentioned before, if you're an SBIR awardee, at least 2/3 of the effort has to go to the small business. Up to 1/3 can go to a subcontractor like a university. If you're an STTR awardee, again, that's 40% by the small business, but anywhere from 30 to 60% can go to a university. And inside of that total budget, let's say you're doing a $300K phase 1, you can request 7% of that inclusive to be your fee. What is this fee? Well, if you're a small business, you are by definition a for-profit entity, and you can think of that 7% fee as being sort of your profit margin. And so that's something you can and should request in your budget. Another thing you can ask for actually beyond the award cap, let's say you're submitting a $300K budget for your phase 1, you know, and that includes your total direct, indirect costs and your fee. You can ask for an extra $5,000 for technical assistance money, and this is money that you can use for regulatory assistance, consultants, that sort of thing. If you do ask for that $5,000 assistance dollar amount, what it does is it makes you ineligible for other programs that are similar in style to NIH, like the CAP or the niche program. So if you want to learn more about that, encourage you again to reach out to our office, and we can talk about what those options are and which might be more appropriate for you. Here I just mentioned it again, the breakout for how budgets work for SBIR versus STTR in phase 1 and phase 2. Also, how do you choose the right solicitation? A contract proposal versus a grant application. Contract solicitations are very well defined. If you are a perfect fit for what the contract solicitation is asking for, by all means, we encourage you to apply. But if you're not, you can always submit a proposal under the grant mechanism, which is also you know, very welcomed. And in that case, you can get more feedback from the program officers as you build your application. I keep mentioning fast track, but I didn't really talk about what that meant. The phase 1 versus a fast track application. Should you apply for a $300K budget project, or should you apply for a $2.3 million project? Things to consider are the stage of your technology's development as well as the stage of your company. Those who are competitive for fast tracks typically have been awarded grants previously and have a demonstrated track record of commercialization. But if you're ever curious or interested in learning more about that, that's another great example of where we say, please come reach out and talk to us. Some of the other things that you should know as you anticipate applying, you may already know this, but we have different forms for you to apply. If you're looking to apply for the January 5th deadline, which is the next one coming up, we are still going to be using Forms D guide. I know this gets a little deep in the weeds, but I want to share it because after that, we'll be switching to Forms E, and I just anticipate that that will be confusing for folks, and I wanted to put it out here. This will apply for all applicants, regardless of whether you're applying for SBIR or R01s, R21s, et cetera. So if you're planning on applying again for anything NIH after January 25th, please be aware that all sorts of forms are going to change. For SBIR, we always recommend that you apply online using Assist. It's a wonderful way to make sure that all of your information gets inserted into the system appropriately and with fewer errors. So let's say you do want to reach out to us and talk with us about the programs we have and how you might be eligible or appropriate. We always recommend that you start early. As I mentioned before, if you're not already part of a small business entity, the whole registration process to be eligible, which includes things like getting a DUNS number, if you don't know what that is already, getting registered with the Small Business Administration, getting a SAM registration number. All of that can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. So we recommend that you start early. We also, as I have said before and repeatedly, we encourage you to reach out to us, but we encourage you to reach out to us at least a month before your intended application due date. So if you're thinking about applying for the next due date, which is January 5th, please reach out to us before December 5th, and maybe even earlier, because with the winter break, folks may be out of office and you may be out of office. One thing you can also do is do your homework on who the NIH has funded previously. We have a great public-facing database called NIH Reporter that allows you to search and look at the abstracts of awards we've previously given out. So that website here is projectreporter.nih.gov. You can type in things like keyword searches. If you want to look at what we've funded in terms of small businesses previously, you can even specify SBIR STTR grants and contracts, and just see the types of technologies we've already funded. You can also, not required, but you can also recommend a specific institute or study section to review your application. And if you aren't sure that NCI is going to fund it, you can talk to us in advance and we can give you tips to make sure that NCI sees your application so that as an awardee you'd be eligible for all the other programs I talked about at the beginning of this presentation. Now after you've done all that, you've applied, you've talked to us, you get your summary statement back. I would just want to stress, you know, our funding success rate for 2016 was 10%. So this is a very competitive program. But we found that one message that we want to reiterate is that if you don't get funded the first time, please consider reapplying. Take into account what the reviewers have told you, and resubmissions tend to score much better than original submissions if you take into account what the reviewers are providing as feedback. So this is something that we've seen communicates true. So, you know, if only 1 out of 10 gets the award, that means the other 9 did not. And so if you are one of the 9, please don't be too disheartened. I know it's a lot of effort to apply, but, you know, the technologies you're working on, we know, are going to make a difference. And so if you have a strong one, we encourage you absolutely to apply to the program. Now, after your review, you can always reach out to your program director who was listed on your summary statement. As I mentioned again, you should spend some time reading and revising your AIMS page. A lot of what we do, if you were to reach out to us, is we would talk about that specific AIMS page and give you feedback based on what we know about what reviewers say. And so we can provide feedback for you on how to write a compelling specific AIMS page. As I wrap up, I just wanted to share that you can learn more about our programs at these 2 websites. On the left is sbir.cancer.gov. That's for the NCI program specifically. On the right is sbir.nih.gov/funding, and you can learn more about the all the funding opportunities that the NIH has for small businesses there. And as I wrap up now, I want to thank you all for your time and attention. I have a link there, a bit.ly link. I encourage you all, please, to provide your feedback on what you've heard today. We try to make these presentations as informative as possible for you, the applicants, and if there's anything that you didn't hear today that you wanted to learn more about, you can leave me those comments using that link as well. And at this time, I will open up the line now for any additional Q&A.
So maybe I'll start off. This is April O. Christie, one of the things that we do in BRP is sometimes we have examples of funded applications online for R01s, R21s, and R03s. And sometimes they can be helpful for folks to look at. I was wondering if the SBIR office has any examples on its website of applications that have been funded.
Oh, that's a great question, April. So NCI, SBIR does not have sample applications, but our sister IC, NIAID, the Institute for Allergies and Infectious Disorders, does have one, and they have a selection of different successful applications from both SBIR and STTR phase 1s, phase 2s, and fast tracks, and I would be happy to share that link with folks, and I can maybe even put it here in the chat menu.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hey, does anybody else have any questions for Christie?
Okay, well, if not, it looks like everyone has the contact information both for feedback and also for questions And Christie did share in her slides some names of other program directors in the SBIR office that may be good to talk to as well. And of course, Cindy and I are always happy to talk to you and think through different options for you as you think about your next steps for your Sprint projects. At this point, too, I'm just going to open up and see if Cindy is on the line, if she has anything else that she wants to share with our cohorts. I will say, another note, we will probably send out a note in the coming weeks to see if you would recommend any of your colleagues to apply to Sprint, because we are planning for a new cohort, and that would start in February of next year for another 8 weeks. We also have appreciated all the evaluation feedback that you've given in the past for Sprint, and we're taking a lot of that really seriously under consideration, including thinking about other next steps to help you in thinking through your next steps for your interventions as you think about putting them out for commercialization or in the marketplace, or even thinking about how the Sprint training has helped you in thinking through your next research project or idea. So it takes more of a dissemination and implementation frame.
So April, this is Cindy. I am on, and I want to thank you, and I want to really thank Christie for giving this webinar. I know for a lot of the folks that have participated in Sprint, thinking about developing a business still, for many of them, seems a bit far off. But I do think that it's great to have this information, and as they move forward with their projects, with their research studies, that this is definitely an option that should be considered. And now they have a tool, you know, in their toolbox that they can refer to as another option that they can think about in moving their research out into practice. If there are other topics that you want to learn more about, please feel free to reach out to us. We are really dedicated to supporting Sprint. It was great, you know, seeing some folks. I saw Todd yesterday at a meeting, and I know a number of us are going to be presenting at the annual Dissemination and Implementation Conference that's going to be held here in Washington. I guess it's in Arlington, Virginia in December. So if you're going to be in the area, if you haven't heard of it, coming to the D&I conference is another option for making great connections and thinking about the next steps for your research.
I would also just want to reiterate that the recording of this webinar, as well as the slides that Christie so generously put together, will be available on the NCI Sprint website later today.
Thank you so much, Tara.
Okay. Well, with that, we will close this webinar. Thank you so much again to Dr. Canaria for doing this webinar. And thank you to all of you for joining us today to learn more about SBIR. Thank you, and please do keep in touch with us. Bye-bye.